actually one of my favorite chapters to speak to, and Mary's been here long to know. Before they built 69, I had a reputation for being late because there was no good way to get from Evansville to Remington. And so I could either take a risk, I could get behind a logging truck outside of Shoals and not get here as I passed Holiday World, or I could drive all the way to Illinois and hope I didn't get behind big semis as I came down the highway. So there's no good way to get here. I used to have to leave like at 9 in the morning to just possibly get, but 69 is good for me now. So thank you very much for coming today. My presentations have a reputation for being very fast-paced and quick, and so I'm not going to disappoint. But because of that, if you have questions while I'm speaking, hold up your hand and stop me, and I'll go ahead and answer the question right then or there to keep things moving. So we're going to talk about a number of things. First, I'm going to do an economic level set. Because in case you've missed some of the news, the economy is just like everything that's going on, and that's also dominating DC, right? And so huge implications for us because the policy lens through which the administration perceives the challenges here has direct impact on our profession. And right now there are a lot of things going on that are massively challenging for us. I'm going to do a state update, a federal update, and then regulatory and legal real quick, and try to get to the end for any additional questions or to let you talk about things we're going to talk about in the chapter. First, May jobs report came out. We had 390,000 new jobs created. This was a hit against an expectation of 370, and this is the first month in like 10 that we've been below 400. So this was kind of expected, largely because, in case we've noticed, we have an all-hands-on-deck economy here. Pretty much everybody that wants to work is, and everybody in here is recruiting and trying to fill a position. I have good news for you. The person that you want to would be ideal for you and would be perfect to work at your company does indeed exist. They just work for somebody else. And it's just very, very hard to pry them loose. They are working. Unemployment sits at 3.6. This is no change. And again, unemployment, as it's reported here, has to do with people who are actively collecting employment. So anytime you're around 3.6, that tells you layoffs are relatively low, but layoffs are starting to pick up. You've probably all seen in the news, all the crypto people are laying people off. All of the mortgage people are starting to lay people off because the mortgage rates went up a full % just in 5 days last week. So you're starting to see some impacts in selected parts of the economy. Wages, we all know wages are up, 5.2 on it. Wages are up and hours are down. And that's not a sustainable profit model, right? You can't have less production going on against the backdrop of higher cost of labor to produce that. Inflation rate is up 8.6%. We all know this is a 40-year high. And to put this in perspective for you, anybody in the room who was working in the 70s, had your first job in the 70s, you don't have to hold up your hand because that makes us old. But that was me, that was Mary, yeah. So we remember inflation. Inflation was raging up the 70s, and inflation today is counted very, very differently. One of the things that happened when Mary and I were working, inflation was sitting right around 14.3%. So rough about double what it is today. And that was very painful for the country to deal with. And on the back of that, the Fed decided one of the problems was how they added up the number. So they came up with a new number that doesn't count fuel or housing or food in the number, and voila, inflation is only 5% to them. But it's 8.6 to us. If it was being counted the same way as it was back when Mary and I were working, it would be right around 14%. So that's the reality that we're in. Producer Price Index came out yesterday. This is a number that I look at because it is the tightest corollary for where inflation is headed. So these are the prices that producers are paying. So Gail, what you're paying for raw materials on the front end to come in, that is a 10.8 rate. So that tells you where inflation is headed. Doesn't mean next month it's going to be 10.8, but it means it's not going to be 8.6, right? That's what that means. Big call out for us. And then, of course, tough thing for us is labor force participation rate. These are the people who should be theoretically eligible for work. So this is between 18 and 62 is what the government kind of looks at and says, okay, those are all the people that could be working. So what percentage of that pop is working? And it's only at 62.3. You should really be right around 64. So we've not recovered to where we were pre-COVID. So we're caught in a couple of whipsaws here, right? We have an insufficient labor supply at the same time that we don't have everybody who could working for a variety of reasons. And then we had 4.4 million quits led by leisure and hospitality. The 4.4 million quits, these are the people that are pushing the wages, right? So how many people here have tried to hire somebody and you told them what you paid and they asked you for more money? How many people? Yeah, exactly. So these people are the ones that are driving that wage inflation number, and they're driving it because they can. Okay? That's exactly what's going on. We basically have 2 jobs open for every person who is not working. And we don't have the labor force to provide that. And you all know that because you all have open positions. This puts us in a real tough spot from an HR standpoint because these are massive economic headwinds and it's impossible for any one of us individually as practitioners to address it. Now, where are the jobs? Where has been the job growth and where is everything happening? Leisure and hospitality, this is the big part of the season for them, right? Summer North America consumes a lot of this type of labor, but remember, these were the folks who were shut down entirely during COVID. So they never really fully recovered. Professional business services up, but you can see here retail trade down. You're going to see retail stores over the next 3 months closing left and right. The retail sales numbers came in just last week and they were horrible, absolutely horrible. Amazon doesn't care, but those numbers were horrible, and that's why you see the retail trade employment dropping like a rock. So those of you who are trying to hire, you will probably find people available who were in the retail trade. And so if there are some fungible skills and fungible knowledge that could be applied within your organization, you can probably get it from those folks because they're going to be looking for work. They're going to be losing their jobs. Inflation projection, this was the reality. The Fed just changed this yesterday and I couldn't grab a chart in time. I apologize for that. They haven't produced it, so I couldn't grab it. But they're now saying inflation will actually go up to 4% the way they counted, right? But when they initially did their projection, they thought inflation would top out at 2%, and of course it's not. It's 8.3, missed by a little bit. To translate that out, when you think about the workers in your workforce and you yourselves, what that basically means is that from a year ago to today, you need $375 more a month for you to be able to have to spend on the goods and services that you were spending to get the same thing, right? To get the very same thing. And how many people here got a raise worth $375 a month this year? Ah, nobody. Oh, good for you. Good for you. You just get to paddle and not get ahead, but you won't struggle. Here's how it hits home. And this is what our workers are seeing, right? And you're seeing it too. Groceries up 12%, highest since '79. Chicken up 17.4, largest increase ever. Restaurants up 9%, largest increase ever. Fuel oil up 107%, largest increase ever. Electricity up 12% since 2006. Rents up, high since '87, and airfare up 38%, largest since '80. These are the headwinds that all of our employees are seeing, right? And it makes common sense that that labor is going to put a lot of pressure on us to make up for that with wages. At the very same time that our companies are paying more for the goods and supportive services that they purchase, so all of our companies are eating the inflation on the front end and then having to deal with the wage inflation on the backside. So that puts murderous profit pressure on every organization. These are tough times for us to navigate as HR professionals. Consumer confidence, therefore, is at an 80-year low. It's the lowest since they've been measuring. University of Michigan does this. When you look at the wage inflation, and for here, I did want to point out, why is this? There we go. So leave out don't pay attention to the Trump administration or Biden administration headings there. That was just what Andy Putzer did. I don't want to make this political. I just wanted to show you this graph because our employees are experiencing this in a real whipsaw fashion. So if they just go back 18 months, you can see where their wages were in comparison to inflation. Inflation was not bothering them, and their wages were paying for everything, and now all of a sudden they are here, right? And that has happened within the last 18 months. And anytime you get whipsawed like that, it's painful, and it is in your distinct living memory of what it was and what it is now, right? And we all know well how employees adjust to sudden and sharp changes in anything that goes on. They handle it just fine. No, they don't. So employment, you can see basically what happened here. We were tearing the ball off the cover, and then COVID hit, and we're just now climbing out in time for a recession. Labor force participation, this was our problem. COVID hit, and it never came back. And that's all of our problems in recruiting and in staffing. They were here, it fell down to here, and not enough came back. And they aren't coming back. Now, part of the reason why they aren't coming back was this. One of the easiest things to track is retirement. Yeah, is retirement. How many people have ever here been surprised by somebody saying, hey, I'm retiring and it's tomorrow? No, not too many. I think that happened in the NFL 2 seasons ago. A guy quit at halftime, but he retired at halftime. That doesn't usually happen. But you usually know. As a matter of fact, people that want to retire usually really never tire of telling you that it's coming. They'll tell you, they'll hold up their phone and say, here's my retirement countdown. I'm at 365 days and 2 hours and 1 minute. We get a lot of warning, and we can plan for that. Here's what COVID did. I refer to COVID as a great accelerator. COVID just stomped on the gas, and so what happened is this, we thought this piece was going to, where's my pointer? We thought this was going to happen, because this was a predictable slope, and then this happened. And so what basically occurred is a good chunk of the workers who were between like 62 and 66 looked at all of the disruption that came in with COVID and said, okay, are we coming back? Are we in the office? Are we wearing a mask? Is it hybrid? Is it remote? Which piece is it? And how is this going to work? And what's going to happen to my pay? And the people between 62 and 65 said, I am so done. Nope, see ya. And they punched out. So what in essence happened is that we were counting on 2.3 million workers still in this workforce, and they said, see ya. And these were not inconsequential people. These were the people, the old ones, right, who know how to show up on time and just do stuff and math in their head and all that stuff. They just left. They left, they didn't come back, and we were not prepared to have that sudden shock, right? Because we've all been running full out for the last 18 months. Everyone as HR professionals just tried to hang on for dear life during COVID. We tried so hard to rebuild things and get them halfway to where they were, and we're just not hitting on all the cylinders because we don't have the people. We don't have the manpower, and we don't have the right type of manpower that we want.
Chris?
Yeah.
With inflation rising as it has, do you think that we will see a certain population starting to come back to the workforce?
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. So the people who retired during COVID just saw their savings incinerate before their very eyes in the last year. So yes, they are coming back to workforce, and some of the ones who retired in the last 5 or 6 years did because inflation murders you when you're on a fixed income. You don't have any way to overcome it. So one of the ways to notice it, I went to McDonald's a few weeks ago, and everybody in it was old. There wasn't one young person in the whole place. They were all old. And the reason for that is that your Social Security benefits aren't taxed. So when you retire, your Social Security benefits aren't taxed. But boy, do they punish you if you save for retirement. So you can earn only a certain amount of money of other things before you start getting taxed on that and Social Security, right? So these people will come back and take part-time jobs, and they will actually tell you, if they come to work for you, hey, I'll come back, I'll work part-time, but it's a max 25 hours a week. And I mean 25. Because when it's 25, I'm out, and that's because they don't want to get taxed on the resulting earnings, right? So yes, they're starting to come back, but they only want to work so much, right? So excellent question, thank you. So let's move on to the Indiana General Assembly. So we're up against it economically. I'll get to what the government's doing or not doing here in just a little bit, but this is what we're up against, and it is just really tough navigation. And my advice is, your executives should know this material. I should expect that they would, but if they don't or they really aren't understanding it, they really need to know that you're aware of it, because these are large macro forces you can do nothing about. You can't. All you can do is go along for the ride and devise strategies and tactics for addressing them. And my only shameless profit plug in this whole show is, if you really struggle with that, you can't figure out, call me. The Indiana General Assembly had the longest session in state history ever. They ran all the way to November of 2021. Longest ever. And the reason they did is because the COVID shutdown screwed up the census. So the census data didn't come to the legislature in time to be able to do the redistricting stuff. And so what basically happened is, the way the Indiana Constitution is written, it was simply easier legally to keep the session open and do nothing until the census information came in than it would be to adjourn and hold a special session. So it was pure convenience, right, to do it. But they did that. And so what happens is, at the end of the census, Indiana has 6.7 million residents. And the objective is to have basically 750,000 people per House district. That's just the way we kind of look at it to make it kind of fair in terms of representation. And this is why Indiana did not lose a seat. Illinois lost a seat, right? Michigan lost a seat. Indiana didn't, because our population stayed strong. We are at a replacement level in Indiana. That's why we didn't lose a seat. But when you looked at it, you ended up with 4 problem districts. Victoria Sparks, up in 5, had 50,000 too many people. Her district was too big. And all this had to do with migration, right? There was a big migration from the south of Indiana into central Indiana over the 10 years between the last census and this one, right? So Sparks ended up 50,000 over. Pence in 6 was 50,000 under. He has rural community. Carson in Indianapolis ended up 50,000 over, so even though he's got a postage stamp of a district, it still had 50,000 too many people in it because of the migration into Indianapolis. And then Bouchon, who is the representative for Evansville, ended up 20,000 under. So these were the fixes that the state had to make, and so you can see these were the prior and these are the current. So you can see Bouchon picked up population here. And then what the Republicans did was, in my mind, revert back to how it's historically been in Indiana, and that is to have 2 districts on the entire Ohio River, right? Because when you are river communities, you have different economics and different concerns than interior counties do. You see, they did the same thing up in 1. 1 covers Lake Michigan. So you have 1 representative who does everything like Michigan. Nobody else in the state has to worry about Lake Michigan. And then these 2, Bouchon and the player to be named in 9, because Trey Hollingsworth is not running for re-election, he's retired, these will do the Ohio River. This is a natural setup for Indiana, very typical to do it. And so you can see here, 6 kind of drifted down into 9, 7 became smaller, even though it was already small, but it's just got so many people in it. Indianapolis is a dense population city, and this is how it all rolled out. So what this basically meant was, about a month or 2 ago, people up here got mail from Larry Bouchon for the first time, wondering who the heck he was. And that's because he is now their representative. The Indiana General Assembly considered a ton of bills, but these were the ones that I was really tracking, because it's my responsibility to pay attention about the stuff that hits us, right? And if there's a red line through it, that means that bill died, right? Now, the fact of the matter is, I know who the committee chairs are of committees where our stuff comes up. We basically come up before House Pensions and Labor, and Senate labor, and then House Health and Senate Health. That's 99% of our stuff will come through those committees. I know those chairs very well, and I know pretty much before a session begins, I can see what the bill reads, and I know what committees go into, and I know it's going to die. But the one I was worried about was this one right here, because you will notice it carries HB 1001, okay? So the way the Republicans do it, and they control both the House and the Senate, their priorities are reflected in the lower number bills, right? So if basically, if a bill has an assignment in HB 001 through HB 005, those are getting done. The caucus is getting those things done, the same thing in the Senate. If it's SB 01, it's getting done, SB 02, SB 03. So this bill right here required my actual testimony because it wasn't a train that could be stopped. So the only thing I could do would be to affect the outcome. If you can pop that video for me.
Sure.
Thanks. So it occurred to me that I don't think anybody's actually seen me in action before. So this is my testimony on that particular bill. So you'll get a sense of what our problems were.
Thank you, Representative Manhattan, and the committee for holding this hearing. Appreciate it very much. I am the Director of Government Affairs for HR Indiana SHRM and represent the HR professionals of the state in consideration of those requests for reasonable accommodation, including an interactive discussion on possible solutions, consideration of the employee's request, and ultimately determination regarding it. The Americans with Disabilities Act, as amended, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act require this process, and it is consistent with the enforcement guidance provided by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And we therefore believe that this due process protects the interests of both the employer and the employee. Our concern is that this bill essentially obviates a private employer's right to establish a vaccine mandate for all intents and purposes. And to make it clear, we would be here opposing a bill should it require vaccines. We oppose mandates. We believe that employers are best suited to make decisions involving their employees' care and well-being. And this bill also potentially exposes employers who choose to require COVID vaccinations to legal risk by failure to acknowledge the duties imposed on employers by the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And it further short-circuits the required due process of those acts by eliminating employer consideration and moving immediately to conclusion in favor of the employee. We've heard a lot of information about medical exemptions, and so I want to address that. Employees providing medical documentation required by this bill would almost certainly satisfy accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But that said, the EEOC still requires us to go through the very same process simply because we know what the conclusion is likely to be does not relieve us of the duty to follow the process. Religion is protected under the First Amendment to the Constitution as a negative right, and it is protected in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act as a positive right, and that is how religion comes into the workplace through Title VII. As it applies to Title VII, employers, therefore, have the ability to determine the intent of the accommodation, to determine if it is sincerely held. Now, I have to tell you that the topic of religion in the workplace is among the most sensitive that HR professionals deal with, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission understands this, and so they've given us very specific guidance with regards to accommodations sought. We may inquire, and I say may inquire as to the sincerity of the request, but inquiry does not mean inquisition. Those are the exact words of the EEOC. That tells us as HR practitioners, you are to tread darn lightly on these requests. The employee's written request, as required in this bill, need not be artful, that's a quote, erudite, that's a quote, or produce any special words. In fact, we are to expect that this may be the first time in an employee's life they've had to explain their religion to anyone else, let alone their employer. And therefore, assuming that the professed belief is not solely and obviously grounded in social, political, or non-religious reasons. You had a person testify earlier that they would not seek a religious exemption because they didn't believe it was sincere, and I applaud them for that. That is exactly the thing that HR has to suss out if we decide to follow that process. The EEOC stresses that no one factor is determinative and instructs employers to evaluate religious objections on an individual basis. This bill does not. This bill makes it automatic, right? So we have a requirement by the EEOC to consider these individually, and an employer should ordinarily assume that all things being equal, therefore, that the employee's religious belief is sincerely held, and once that standard has been met, then you move on to the determination process. And it is exactly that. It is a process where the employer makes a final determination. The HR Indiana SHRM position is accordingly. Our more than 3,000 members have a long tradition of promoting equal employment opportunities for all individuals, and we have deep experience in navigating the risk matrix of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the ADA. Our argument is that the playing field must be equal and level. This bill favors the employee's fait accompli. We also believe the bill perils employers to possible exposure under federal laws they cannot avoid while flying in the face of guidance provided by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Accordingly, we ask that the bills be amended to fix these issues or that you vote no. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you. Any questions?
You can kill it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So
You just became
I want to make sure you mentioned the lady earlier who said
Question from the committee at that point. So go on. They did indeed amend the bill and fixed it. I worked with the head of the committee on those particular changes, got those in, and that's why nothing changed for us, because it allowed us to do what we always do anyhow with everything that we do. The reason I had to be on that bill again is because that was going to go, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's bills that aren't going to go. So if a bill is set at bill H, if it's H 302, I don't really care. That thing's not going to see the light of day, right? I'm not worried about that one. But the higher ones up, you have to pay attention to. The legislature came back for one day in May, and they did a veto override. This was 1041. This was the bill that required, for purposes of interscholastic athletic events, that individuals had to compete in the gender that they were born in. The governor had vetoed this bill. I was quite surprised that he vetoed it because they had enough votes to override it, right? It was nearly unanimous in the Senate, and I think there were only 12 votes no in the House. I mean, it was literally that. It was just a crushing number in favor of this. And so it was very obvious that the veto was going to be overridden, but he did it anyway, which I don't quite understand. This is like the third session he's had in a row where he's vetoed something and they came back and overrode the veto. His appetite for punishment puzzles me. But that was it for the state. Right now, state's going to come into session again in January. This is a budget year, so this one's always frantic because when you put money behind things, that's always a big fight. So I'll see what's coming, but I'll figure that out when it happens. Let's go ahead and look at the feds. President Biden, President of the United States, his approval rating, struggling. You can see here, this was the real break point. It's easier to spot here on this side. This was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Never really recovered from that point in time, and it's only gone downhill from there. Now, when it comes to presidential approval, when you look at this sort of thing, and this is a composite of polls, that's the reason I use Real Clear Politics, because they add everything up. You notice I didn't cite Reuters here, or Gallup or anything else, right? It's a composite of polls. And the way to measure this here has more to do with the president's ability to be effective on the Hill to persuade, right? To exert force on the legislative body, because obviously if he's highly popular, then it stands to reason your constituents would want you to do what he wants to get done, right? So that's the way to think about it. And he just doesn't have any stroke. And you kind of see that in terms of what goes on. He can't get his agenda through. Just doesn't have the stroke to do it. You can see here Congress. The consolation you can take is Congress is more hated than him, but their approval rating is actually fairly high in comparison to past years. This is right direction, wrong direction. This is direction of the country, 71% wrong. No kidding, right? That's where everybody is. So why is that happening? Here I did use Gallup because this was the most recent survey. So what Gallup did, two things. Gallup laid out the administration's priorities and then asked the public what their priorities were to see the alignment or the gaps. Okay, so that's what Gallup did, and this was from back in April. So what they determined that the administration's priorities, and Gallup based this just on kind of like where the energy was going, what were they talking about, and what were they looking at. So gun control, green energy, and voting rights tied this piece up at that point in time. The public said they were most concerned with the economy, crime, and illegal immigration. So that's part of the disconnect. This is one of the challenges with trying to get your program through is, again, these people are voting. These are the people who are talking to their representatives. And so if there's not alignment between this and this, it's just going to be a tough slog for you. And that's exactly what the administration has had. It's just been a real tough slog to get their stuff done. So in Congress, the House is controlled by the Democrats, and therefore the Speaker of the House is a Democrat. That's Nancy Pelosi. Has been Speaker of the House, looking around the room at the ages of some of these people, nearly as long as you can remember. For other people, you remember a different person. There are 220 party. It's like Republican Party is tied right there with the Democrats, but the Independent Party in Maine has been around forever, and it is the strongest party in Maine. So it's very, very typical to have an independent come to Congress from Maine exactly as that, an independent, but he caucuses with the D's. So because he caucuses with the D's and Bernie caucuses with the D's, that gives him 50-50, which means that Kamala Harris, Vice President, as Senate Pro Tem, is the tiebreaker, right? Is a tiebreaker. Now that would be if everybody voted their jersey, but that's not what's been happening, right? What's been happening is that these two people are Democrats, Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona and Joe Manchin from West Virginia, and they have not been on board with a lot of the president's agenda. And because it is so tight, because it is so narrow majority, it's a 50-50 split. If either one of these two say no, it doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen, right? And that has been another challenge for the president, because Sinema said, I'm not going to expand the Supreme Court, and I'm not going to do away with the filibuster. Done. Manchin said, not going to pass the Build Back Better plan. Doesn't get done. That's it. That's it. And that is the nature of narrow majority. Same thing happened to George Bush, I think in his second term. Super narrow majority tie, and all it takes, like I said, when everything is a tie, every senator becomes potentially the most important one. Right? Think about that. Every senator is the most important one. It's cool for them, but not so much for us. So, here's a congressional approval. It's terrible, 21%. But the reason the way I've always looked at this, the congressional approval, everybody likes to crack on Congress. Everybody. And yet incumbents win their races year after year after year after year. And I think about public education. Everybody hates public education except for the school their kid goes to. That's fine. But all the others are messed up. Congress the same way, right? The whole place is messed up, but not my person. My person is okay. So the House priorities. They impeached former President Trump. They passed COVID stimulus. They wanted to get the increase in minimum wage. They couldn't get it done. Couldn't even get it out of the House. H.R. 1 For the People Act got passed. This was the federal takeover of elections, is what For the People Act was. That passed the House. They passed a big infrastructure bill, and they passed the PRO Act. The PRO Act would do away with union voting. They would just hand you the cards and you recognize the union. Just don't mess around with votes, because things can happen in an election. You know? So they passed the PRO Act. But the Senate, they tried President Trump, but he was not convicted. Second time they did that in like 24 months. They did pass COVID relief, but they didn't pack or rebalance the Supreme Court. And I say pack or rebalance because it really just depends on which part of the political divide you're on. So if you're a Republican, it's called packing the court, and if you're a Democrat, it's called rebalancing. But either way, right. They didn't get that done. They didn't eliminate the filibuster. They did not pass H.R. 1, and they did pass the infrastructure bill, but it was changed, and the House didn't like it, and they didn't pass the PRO Act. So if you are the administration and you're looking at this, where's your problem? The Senate. All right, there's your problem. And so if you are a representative in the House, you're saying, hey, we did our job. But our arms are kind of short, right? They end here at the House, and when they go across the street, it's no longer us, right? That's the nature of divided government. So the Senate is really the issue, and of course, Build Back Better didn't pass. So President Biden still continues to believe he can pass some version of that. No one else in D.C. believes that. It's not getting any stroke. It's not getting any push. Speaker Pelosi is full bore on the January 6th committee hearings, which are on in prime time. How many people have seen those in prime time? One or two? Yeah. The Nielsen ratings basically reflect that. It's just not. I know that I felt bad for him because they got beaten by a rerun of Young Sheldon. But they're really focused on that. They're really focused on it. And this is about the campaign, and I don't blame them one bit, right? If I were on the Democrat side, the economic stuff is really bad, and you're running for your job, because that's what happened. Imagine if we had to reapply for our jobs every 2 years, wouldn't that suck? So that's what they do. They reapply for their jobs every 2 years, and they got to have something. And so they don't have legislative accomplishments to point at so much, and their party's agenda hasn't got through. So if you are running for your life, I mean literally for your life, you're going to your party and saying, what are you doing for me, right? And so that's really what the Jan 6 committee hearings are about. Pelosi is doing her level best to support her team and give them ammo to go into the re-election. Senator Schumer is focused on H.R. 1. He doesn't have votes to pass it, and no one understands that one either. So let's go to the regulatory activity, because the NLRB is busy. So the Wage and Hour Division has begun the process of rulemaking. They're looking at the salary floor. And if you're sitting in the room here and you say, wait a minute, didn't we just do that 2 years ago? Yes, we did do that 2 years ago, but they want a different number. And so they are really looking at taking it somewhere between 50 and 80 to have somebody to be exempt, right? How many people think that would be just a tad disruptive to their organization? $50,000 to $80,000, right? Because we know the exempt test, right? We know the exempt test. The duties can be exempt, but you can't meet the salary floor. They're not exempt. They're going to be hourly. So I was on a listening session. So I was invited to a listening session. SHRM got me on board for that, so they sent my name to the Department of Labor, and they invited me. So as you can imagine, I had nothing to say, and I just listened very passively. That didn't happen. I tore it apart. But that's really what they're looking at. So the purpose of the meetings they're holding right now are cost and benefits of increasing the salary level, best methodology for changing it. We want them to stick with the 2004 version of it, because their idea is basically to kind of look at it every year, and that would just wear us out. We don't have the capacity within our enterprises to wait to have the government pick a number year after year after year. So we want the 2004. They want to know what the considerations are for that, and how frequently should this happen, and whether they're warranted at all. And what I basically shared was, look, wage inflation is already at 5.2%. I swear, I don't know about you, but I drive by a billboard on Walnut Avenue in Bloomington where there's a giant billboard that says Domino's managers make an average of $80,000 a year. And I'm saying, I chose the wrong profession. But anyway, the $80,000 a year for Domino's manager, right? So I said, look, we're already suffering from wage inflation. We're being pulled up. Wages are already screaming at the highest rate they've done. You do this to us, and so many companies will not be able to meet this salary floor, and then we are going to be the ones having conversations with employees who have served us well and served us ably and told them, I know you've been exempt for 15 years, but we can't pay you this amount of money. We can pay this, but you're going to be punching a clock now. Does that make you feel happy? No, it doesn't. You should see the look on her face. It was already, don't talk to me because I'm already angry. So but those are the conversations, and that's what I told the Department of Labor. The workforce disruption that would come from this, because whether the Department of Labor likes it or not, we all know as practitioners that becoming an exempt employee, moving into an exempt role, is seen not merely as one in which you get greater responsibility. That is a status marker. For so many people, it is a status marker. And it now says, I am paid for what I deliver. I'm not paid by the clock. And that is a big, big milestone in people's careers to move to that. And no amount of us saying the government made me do this makes it feel any better. And I just said it would crush workforce morale at a time where we just can't take it. We are hanging on by our freaking fingernails right now. And to take this in the teeth, we can't have. I do expect them to do it, however. I hope it is an 80. I just hope it is an 80. They're also looking at independent contractors again. You're going to say, wait a minute, didn't we do independent contractors just a year ago? Yes, we did. But they're looking at it again. And the main issue here, they tried to change it right away, and federal court blocked them. But they're basically really concerned about the definition of independent contractor, and they're very concerned about what they should do with gig workers. As you may be aware, in California, court found that Uber and Lyft had to make their drivers employees of Uber and Lyft. They were no longer independent contractors. That's the only state that's done that. Some cities have done it. I think Austin did. No, Austin kicked out Uber and Lyft altogether. That was a different one. Philly, I think Philly did that. Philadelphia did that. So they're really concerned about that. But they don't like the idea of independent contractor very much. And I remember vividly during the Obama administration, I was able to have a conversation with Secretary of Labor Tom Perez at the time. And I asked him a question. I said, tell me your point of view. How are you, because I just didn't want to walk out criticizing the thing, right? So I said, tell me your point of view, help me understand. How are you coming at this independent contractor thing? And he said, well, I don't believe there's any such thing as an independent contractor. I think everybody is an employee of somebody else, and that's just how it is and how it ought to be. I'm like, boy, is there a big difference between you and me? Because I'm an independent contractor. I'm pretty confident I work for myself. But that just really illustrated to me, I wasn't angry with him, really, that was just his point of view, and he's the Secretary of Labor, right? He gets to have that point of view and push that forward. But that just gives you an idea of the gulf between the point of view, right, of the Department of Labor and kind of where we sit. I'm going to be on another listening session on June 24th on this one. I'm sure you all have an opinion. Supreme Court decisions. So in case you didn't know, the Supreme Court's been pushing out decisions, just not the one everybody wants to hear about. But they're pushing things out. But this one was important to us. How many people in the room have an arbitration agreement with your employees? Your employees don't go to the EOC if there's a workforce situation. One hand here. So we have arbitration. Okay, good. Very good. So this will be particularly important, at least to you. What happened here was that a Taco Bell franchise owned by Sundance, and Sundance, for the record, is the largest Taco Bell franchise in the country. They own Taco Bells in multiple states. and they have a arbitration agreement. So they had an employee file a claim in court. So she did not follow the rules of the arbitration. She instead went to a court. Then Sundance, for reasons that made no sense to me, began addressing the issue in court. And they addressed it for 8 months. And then when it looked like they were going to lose in court, they go, hey, wait a minute, none of this really matters because we have an arbitration agreement. And the court said, the lower court said, too late. You did, but then you went into court, and so you chose to play over here, and so you're here. That went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, said, your own fault. You had an arbitration agreement. You could have held it within that. You could have moved for an immediate dismissal of the charges by saying they can't be venued here. Here's the agreement that the employee signed. Oh, your employee signed agreements, right? They signed. You're not here. Yes. Okay. Good. Excellent practice. So you could have just produced that document, right, and said, here it is, and you don't have any authority here. This goes to an arbitrator. But Sundance did not do that. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, said, tough darts, Sundance. Your arbitration agreement may exist, but you obviated it by your own hand. You chose to do it a different way. So the call out here is, if you've got an arbitration agreement, if you say you're going to do part, I feel, as an employer, if you lay something on the handbook, you lay a rule down, you say this is what we're going to do, you kind of need to do that. And if you find you don't want to do that, change the policy, right? But this is how the court looked at it. So for anybody doing arbitration, has an arbitration agreement, or is thinking about an arbitration agreement, be very, very conscious of this. And I'm going to wrap up here and talk a little bit about election 2022. So the big issue here is the control of the Senate. This is the one I'm really watching, okay? So a little bit here on how elections have historically worked. It is very normal and typical for the party of the president who won the election to lose the House of Representatives in the next election. It happened to Clinton, it happened to Obama, it happened to Bush, and it happened to Trump. And so nobody's really talking about the House because the Democrats only have a 7-seat advantage in the House, and that's not enough. So that's going to flip. But the control of the Senate is another thing, because if you look at it from the Democrat side, this is a pretty good deck. Everything that you are defending in the main are safe seats, right? Everybody here is going to win. Now, I don't know about Nevada. Nevada is toss-up because the senator in that seat, what's her name? Cortez Castro, was appointed to the seat when the senator who was elected resigned because he got a really sweet lobbying gig from Aiken, Gump, Strauss, and Howard in New York. So he took that, and the governor appointed her. So she's only been in the seat for like 6 months, which is like brand new. So she'll be an incumbent, but kind of not really. And she's running against a man named Paul Laxalt. Can't be Junior, but he's the third one in that family named Paul Laxalt. How many people remember the name Paul Laxalt? Yeah, okay. Kind of have to be old enough to remember that. There's been a Laxalt who was a senator in Nevada like 5 times in Nevada's history, right? It's just what they do. And that's his name. I know nothing about the guy other than his name is Laxalt, so right there that makes it a toss-up in that state, right? Colorado is going to go. Michael Bennett is the incumbent there. He is a very effective campaigner. Don't know. Arizona, tough race for Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly's up in that one. First time up for re-election, that's going to be tough. Illinois, gone. New York, gone. All these other gone. Pennsylvania's going to be interesting. This is an open seat because a Republican retired. And so that race is now between Dr. Oz. The dude you saw on TV? Yeah. So he's the Republican nominee. He won. And the guy he's running against is a really super progressive but who had a stroke like 5 days before the election and the primary election and hasn't campaigned since. Now, I think Dr. Oz, in total fairness of treatment, ought to offer to treat the guy and just make it fair. But that isn't happening, so we don't really know when that guy will hit the campaign trail. He hasn't yet. His campaign is being kind of quiet about it. They've sent out people, but I don't know how that race will go because that's total crazy town. I do not know. Georgia seat is up. This is Raphael Warnock against Herschel Walker. Yeah, Herschel Walker. So Raphael Warnock won a seat that he filled out. So he's up for election again. So he's kind of like Kathleen Cortez Mastro in Arizona. So he's up again, and he's running against Herschel Walker. Now, if you don't know who Herschel Walker is, he started at the University of Georgia and won Georgia their first national championship, right? And if you're in Georgia, there are two religions, really, Christianity and football. And that guy brought Georgia a national championship. And everybody remembers it, and he announced he was running for the Senate seat on Herschel Walker Avenue in Atlanta. They named a street after him, so that's where he announced he was running. And he's running against Raphael Warnock. I expect him to take that race simply because there's just so many football fans. I'm not kidding. Kind of like Mississippi, they put their football coach in the Senate, Tommy Tuberville. I mean, yeah. Florida, Marco Rubio is up against Val Demings. She is not going to beat him. Marco Rubio couldn't lose the Cuban vote, dead, and he's just going to carry that. But these are the opportunities. These are the opportunities because remember, the Democrats only need 2 seats to check out West Virginia and Arizona, right? Sinema and Manchin, if they just win 2 more seats, that's all they need, then they can check those 2 out and they have all the votes they need to get everything done. They are that close. They are that close. And so they have the opportunities, but the Republicans have opportunities too. And believe it or not, I think when all this sturm and drang is done and the bajillions of dollars that have been spent on all these races get spent, I would not be shocked if we didn't land right in the same place where we are right now. I really wouldn't. Which is not the outcome that the administration wants, for sure. We had a census reapportionment. You can see here who the winners and losers were. Texas picked up seats, Florida, North Carolina, Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. There were a lot of lawsuits involved in some of these, especially Pennsylvania, New York. Both had their districts thrown out, and a court is doing them. It's a mess in some of these states. And I sure hope for these poor people it gets settled out before November. But I don't think you'll see the full effect of this until the next race. But this was the objective of the Senate. And again, Indiana is not on this list because we didn't grow population and we didn't lose population. So we stayed right where we were. So how does this affect us? First of all, any administration, doesn't matter if it's Democrat, doesn't matter if it's Republican, any administration that finds itself frustrated and unable to achieve what it wants to achieve legislatively, then turns around and looks at its bureaucracy and its agencies to make rules to get done what they want to get done without the legislative process. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. That activity you saw by the Department of Labor, right? They cannot get a wage increase through against the backdrop of all the wage inflation. They can't get it done, but they can get it done with a rule, right? Same with an independent contractor. So what that means to you as professionals, I believe what you should buckle up for, you're going to get a lot of email from SHRM saying, comment on this, we're going to be sending all these letters to the EOC, or we're going to be sending all these letters to the Department of Labor, we're going to be sending all these letters over here. And you'll notice I didn't say I was doing anything because the way the federal government is set up is I can get in front of our representatives, and I am, and I do. I'm in D.C. quite a bit. It is illegal for me to trot over to the EEOC and say, hey, one of the commissioners, schedule a visit with me. I want to persuade you. That's a federal crime. Okay, you can't do that. You cannot have any interaction directly with government agencies. So this listening session that I'm on, that's me and like 50 other people. right? And for the record, the listening session I was on the salary thing, nobody was in support of that. I mean, like nobody. There were like 80 people on that call and they were all no. That's the closest you can come to it, right? That's the closest you can come to it. They can also ask you for in-person testimony, but that's pretty rare. Mostly what they want is letters and comment. So my strong advice to you is when you get those notifications from SHRM to weigh in, please do so, because that's the only way that your voice can be heard legally through that process to affect the thinking of those agencies. So, I left you like no time, I apologize.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?